Hello friends, I'm Professor Filip Kovacevic and this is the 16th edition of the Russian newspaper's Monitor. I hope you are doing well today and have a lot of exciting plans for the coming weekend. Please consider becoming a subscriber to Newsbud. This would make it possible for us to have even more shows like this one. Remember, Newsbud has no corporate or government sponsors. It is people-oriented media supported by the people themselves. Now, let's begin our weekly roundup of the front page news in the Russian newspapers. Today, we will begin by looking at the front page of Rossiyskaya Gazeta, the Russian government-owned newspaper. This is the best way to find out what the current thinking in the Kremlin is. So, let's look at the edition for January 16, 2017. On the front page, there is a photograph of Nikolai Patrushev, the current secretary of the Russian National Security Council and the former longtime head of the FSB, the Russian Domestic Law Enforcement and Counterintelligence Agency, the equivalent of the U.S. FBI. More than a month ago, on Newsbud, I published an entire article about Patrushev, in which I presented the reasons why I believe that he was likely to become the next Prime Minister of Russia. I have been the first Russia analyst in the English-speaking world to say so publicly. And now, what do we find? Right after the New Year and Christmas holidays, which are the most important holidays in Russia, we find Patrushev giving an interview on the front page of the government-owned newspaper. In other words, Patrushev is being promoted to the Russian audience as a very important and influential political actor, ready to assume one of the top positions in the government. Everything in the article sounds prime ministerial. The title is The World Without Myths and Illusions, while the subtitle explains that in the interview, Patrushev will give his opinion on the future relations between Russia and the Western countries, including the United States. So, let us examine what Patrushev said during the interview. According to Patrushev, the main goal of the outgoing Obama administration was to discredit and humiliate Russia. This was done because Obama wanted to retain the illusion of the unipolar world and the global leadership of the United States, whereas it was clear that the world was moving toward multipolarity and more equitable international security architecture. Patrushev claimed that by fabricating false accusations against Russia, Obama tried to hide the United States was brutally violating international law and other international obligations by stirring up historical animosities in the Middle East and creating new and dangerous division lines in Europe and Asia. This, according to Patrushev, resulted in the exponential rise of terrorism and the creation of humanitarian catastrophes in several states, which up until then possessed relative political and economic stability. Patrushev also commented on the Russian military intervention in Syria. He stated that the intervention was successful in assisting the Syrian government in defeating the terrorist militias supported by various foreign powers in the strategic regions of the country. He added that Russia was also involved in distributing humanitarian aid to the civilian population, as well as in taking active measures in demining efforts throughout the country. Patrushev also said that intervention in Syria made Russia much safer because it enabled the Russian military and intelligence structures to break and destroy the terrorist networks that were planning to infiltrate the Russian territory and conduct violent attacks against the Russian civilians. He stated that in connection with such activities, the Russian security services arrested more than 900 individuals. Patrushev also emphasized the importance of the relatively new, non-US dominated international organizations in the fight against international terrorism. For instance, he stated that both the Shanghai Cooperation Organization and the BRICS group have established relevant committees to coordinate joint anti-terrorist efforts. The Russian-led military alliance, called the Collective Security Treaty Organization, has also developed joint programs in the fight against terrorism. Patrushev expressed his regret that the Obama administration was unwilling to cooperate with Russia on this issue, but he expected that cooperation would improve with the new US administration. For instance, Patrushev noted that the president-elect Donald Trump refused to engage in the anti-Russian rhetoric, which had become the leitmotif of the Obama foreign policy. In fact, according to Patrushev, this rhetoric and the activities that accompanied it pushed the Russian relations with the United States, NATO, and the EU several steps back. For instance, NATO military pressure on Russia was amplified. According to Patrushev, the number of NATO ships in the Black Sea increased 3 times, and the air activity around the Russian borders doubled. NATO also persisted in its expansion efforts by trying to add more member states in the Balkans. The so-called missile defense shield facilities were set up in Romania and are being constructed in Poland. There are also significant NATO military activities directed against Russia going on in the Arctic region. According to Patrushev, Obama's unprecedented decision to expel 35 Russian diplomats was an attempt to blame Russia for the failures of his administration and his political party. This is why Russia did not retaliate and was still ready to cooperate with the United States on the basis of mutual respect and equality. Patrushev stated that he did not believe that the administration of Donald Trump would be able to alter the direction of Obama's Russian policy for some time to come. The measures designed to restrain Russia will not go away overnight. Still, Patrushev said that it would be both in the interest of the Russian and American peoples for the Russian and US relations to be more positive and constructive. There were many areas in which the two countries could work together, not only on the issue of terrorism, but also on the issue of information security and cyber defense. Patrushev also claimed that the refugee problem in Europe was the result of the short-sighted US and European interventions in the Middle East and attempts at so-called regime change. He stated that the problem of illegal immigration is not as big in Russia as in Europe. Lastly, Patrushev stated that 2017 will be the election year in many European and non-European countries strategically important to Russia. The presidential elections will be held in France, in Serbia, in Iran, and in Mongolia, while the parliamentary elections will take place in Germany, the Czech Republic, Luxembourg, Norway, and the Netherlands. He expressed his optimism that in all these countries, the newly elected governments would advocate a policy of political and economic cooperation with Russia and abandon the path of needless confrontation. In my opinion, Patrushev's tone in this article is measured and diplomatic and shows that the Russian political elites, while not forgetting the past, are still willing to engage in a political dialogue with the West on the questions of mutual interest. Patrushev placed all the blame for the anti-Russian policies on Obama and therefore cleared the way for Trump to show that he would be different. He was ready to give Trump the benefit of the doubt and distinctly stated that Russia would be patient for the positive changes to take place and that there is no expectation for this to happen overnight. And so, once again, just like at the end of the Cold War, it is up to the West to decide whether it wants Russia to be a friend or a foe. For the sake of the peace in the world, I hope that the Western leaders this time around make a right choice. Now, let's look at the front page of Nezavisimaya Gazeta, the middle-of-the-road newspaper, the edition for January 16, 2017. On the bottom of the left side of the front page, there is an article with a sarcastic title, Davos is no longer interested in who Mr. Putin is. The subtitle explains that at the World Economic Summit in Davos, Switzerland, China is being presented as a global leader, and Russia only as a boring irritant. The article reports that this year the World Economic Forum will take place between January 17th and January 20th. However, it appears that nobody from the Trump administration will attend. According to the article, the Trump officials explain their absence by wanting to remain faithful to the promises given to the American people during the pre-election campaign. However, in the absence of the United States, China is being raised by the organizers to play the dominant role. The Chinese President Xi Jinping will deliver the main speech at the plenary, and the World Economic Forum Executive Director Klaus Schwab stated that he considered China the most responsible global leader in the current age of widespread uncertainty. According to the article, Russian delegation will include no political heavyweights. The article comments that while it is true that Russia still sends government delegations to the summit, the sense is this is more and more done out of inertia and diplomatic protocol. For instance, in 2009, Russia was represented by Vladimir Putin, who at that time was the Russian Prime Minister. Dmitry Medvedev came twice, in 2011 as President and in 2013 as Prime Minister. However, this year, the Russian delegation will be headed by an official who is much lower in the government hierarchy, the Deputy Prime Minister Igor Shuvalov. The article reports that during the past 2 decades, Russia used to be a center of international attention in Davos. There were even whole sessions devoted to Russia, including the famous one during the summit in the year 2000 on the enigmatic personality of Vladimir Putin. Who is Mr. Putin? That was just a few weeks after he was chosen by Boris Yeltsin to be his successor. In the summit held in 2007, the main rumor was that Medvedev would be Putin's successor, which turned out to be correct. Whereas in the past, there were many publications about the state of economy in Russia and investment opportunities there, the article reports that this year there were none. It is as if Russia and the Russian economy did not exist anymore on the global business map. This, of course, is done for clear political and ideological reasons, which is hardly a way to conduct profitable business. In my opinion, this kind of attitude exposes Davos for what it really is, an attempt by Western corporations with global reach to exert dominant political power over the world. If a country refuses to play this game, it is economically isolated with the aim to destroy its rebellious political elite. However, in my opinion, it is already very clear that this strategy applied to Russia not only does not work, but has backfired against the West. In terms of the Davos material directly referring to Russia, the article located only the publication by Lawrence Friedman, a military science professor at King's College in London. Friedman wrote on the alleged hybrid wars conducted by Russia and how they were not all that effective. The article concludes that in the end, Russia did appear at Davos, but only in the role of, quote, a boring irritant, organizing failed propaganda campaigns against the West. According to the article, the role assigned to China is very different. There are several key publications dealing with the Chinese economy and the Chinese influence on the world affairs, including the one by the high-level Communist Party functionary Xian Xianggo. The Russian delegation still included important representatives of the Russian economic life, such as the president of Sberbank, German Gref, and the president of VTB Bank, Andrei Kostin. There was also a session entitled Russia and the World. However, this is only a shadow of the Russian earlier presence at Davos. According to the economic analyst Artyom Deyev, there is a rapidly fading interest of Davos in Russia and Russia in Davos due to the existence of the anti-Russian economic sanctions and the sense that Russia is on the path of advocating a different, a non-neoliberal economic model for the world. As I stated earlier, as soon as the global corporate heads, the high priests of neoliberalism, realized that they have lost the control of the Russian economy which they had in the aftermath of the Cold War and into Medvedev's presidency, they have begun to devise measures to bring Russia down and to their heel. The marginalization at the World Economic Forum in Davos is on the list of these measures, but is far from being in the top 10 in terms of damage to Russia. However, if Davos continues in this vein, considering also the attitude of the incoming Trump administration towards it, it may be on the road to irrelevance, and the world will be better for it. Now, we'll go to the front page of Izvestia, a moderate pro-government newspaper, the edition for January 17, 2017. There is an interview with the French politician Marine Le Pen, the leader of the rightist populist political party Front National. Next to her photograph, the title quotes her words, "The Crimea was never Ukrainian." The article reports that according to the public opinion polls, Marine Le Pen has held the leading position among the candidates for the French presidency during the last 6 months. According to the article, the fact that she might become the next French president has created a lot of anxiety in the European Union circles because she promises to hold a referendum on the French exit from the EU, and she also advocates the immediate lifting of economic sanctions against Russia. So let's examine more closely what Marine Le Pen said in this exclusive interview with two Izvestia journalists. First of all, Le Pen said that her political ambition was to make France independent from the United States and NATO and bring back normal political relations between France and Russia by lifting the economic sanctions. She stated that she would like France to be free, independent, and respected, and that this could be accomplished only within a multipolar global order. According to Le Pen, France must have its own voice in the world again and not blindly follow the EU dictate. She emphasized that unlike other presidential candidates, François Fillon, Manuel Valls, and Emmanuel Macron, she did not intend to seek the approval for her political agenda in Berlin. Le Pen also stated that as a president, she would recognize the Crimea as a part of Russia. According to her, the Crimea belonged to Ukraine only administratively by the arbitrary decision of the Soviet leadership. It was never truly Ukrainian. The people of the Crimea voted in a referendum to join Russia, and according to Le Pen, their decision should have been recognized by the UN as democratic and legitimate. Le Pen also said that she supported a peaceful resolution of the Ukrainian conflict. She claimed that at this time, the EU is playing a destabilizing rather than a constructive role, because it constantly demonizes one side. And that was not the approach that could ever lead to stability and peace in Ukraine. In addition, Le Pen stated that within 6 months of her assuming the presidential mandate, she would organize a referendum on the French exit from the EU, the so-called Frexit. If the majority of the French people voted for it, she would demand that the EU return to France the full territorial, fiscal, financial, and legislative sovereignty. If the EU refuses to do so, which is the most likely scenario, Le Pen will immediately initiate the exit procedures. Moreover, Le Pen said that she would not mind if the entire EU disintegrated, because in her opinion, the structures of the EU had long ago stopped caring about the interests of ordinary French people and also ordinary people all over Europe. This, according to Le Pen, was seen in the way the EU handled the catastrophic migrant crisis in 2015. Le Pen also stated that her political platform might attract the vote from all political options, including the left, because she offered to lead France along the lines of economic nationalism, cultural protectionism, and the increase in social programs and public services. It is very significant that the pro-government Russian newspaper on its front page published an interview with one out of the several presidential candidates in France. This is an indication that the sympathies of the Kremlin go in the direction of Marine Le Pen. And as can be seen from this interview, this is hardly surprising. On all the points, Le Pen is on the same side as the Russian President Vladimir Putin. There is no doubt that in the case that she wins the French presidential elections in April, we will be witnessing the most dramatic restructuring of the European politics since the end of the Cold War. The European Union will be fragmented beyond repair, but the prospects of the Eurasian Economic Union, led by Russia and perhaps also including China, will rise exponentially. The response of the geopolitical losers, represented by NATO, the rogue billionaires, and the intelligence factions in the MI6 and the CIA, might be to lash out and engineer an apocalyptic European war. Now, considering that we have not covered it for a long time, let's look at the front page of Pravda, the newspaper of the Russian Communist Party, the edition for January 19, 2017. Let's see what the largest opposition party in Russia is telling its audience. On the front page, we find several photographs of social protests throughout Russia. The demands of these protests have to do with the resignations of corrupt government officials and the increase of the investment in basic social programs. On the left side of the front page, there is an article which reports on the activities that the Russian Communist Party is planning in the coming period. It quotes the statement of Vladimir Kashin, who is the deputy president of the Communist Central Committee. Kashin said that the Communist Party planned to organize countrywide demonstrations to commemorate two historical events. First, on January 21st, the Communists will commemorate 93 years since the death of the Soviet Union founder and the Communist Party leader Vladimir Ilyich Ulyanov Lenin. All the party members and sympathizers are invited to come to the Red Square in Moscow, where the delegation of the party high officials will lay flowers at the Lenin Memorial. Secondly, on February 23rd, the Communist Party will celebrate the 99th anniversary of the formation of the Soviet Army and Navy. According to Kashin, this will be a good public relations opportunity to call on the Russian government and the President Vladimir Putin to increase the funding for the military and strengthen the Russian geopolitical position in the world. At the same time, the communists will also demand that those that they refer to as the liberals in the Russian government stop the implementation of various austerity measures and start an extensive program of investment in the development of manufacturing and agriculture in Russia. According to the communists, only these kinds of measures could ensure the long-term political stability and overall security of the country. In my opinion, what we see here is that the Russian political scene is not monolithic and one-dimensional as it is frequently presented in the Western mass media. Vladimir Putin is a strong autocratic leader, but he is not a dictator. The opposition parties in Russia freely publish their newspapers and organize their activities, including the anti-government demonstrations and protests. The front-page articles published by the Pravda demonstrate that the communists are very critical of the economic policies of the Putin administration. They also think that his foreign and security policies are making too many concessions to the West and make Russia look weak. They claim that the Russian military and intelligence services should play a greater role in asserting the Russian power in the world. This means that those in the West, including those in the official Washington circles, the media, and the academia, who every day demonize Putin and make bombastic pronouncements about his being the greatest threat to the West since the end of the Cold War, know very little or care to know about what is actually going on in the Russian political life. In reality, Putin is in the middle of the political spectrum in Russia, and the essence of his decisions and policies has been to balance different political factions in order to provide political stability and economic development. Attacking Putin and trying to replace him is not going to lead to a better geopolitical deal for the West. In fact, it may do just the opposite. It may provide a helping hand to the communists to come to power again, and they will be much more difficult to negotiate with. As we have seen, they have not abandoned the ideas of Lenin, the destruction of capitalism, and the establishment of a radically different society. Lastly today, let's take a look at the Russian semi-tabloid press. Let's look at the weekly newspaper Argumenty и Facty, the largest circulation newspaper in Russia, the edition for January 19, 2017. On the front page, we see a photo montage of Donald Trump riding a horse and dressed like a cowboy from the Wild West, being greeted by three figures dressed as the Russian knights from the Middle Ages. The knights are holding the banner saying welcome in English, and the title says, America, which orientation toward Russia, with a question mark. The article continues on page 6 and 7 of the newspaper. It presents a chronology of the Russia-US relations since the October Revolution in 1917. This chronology shows that the relations between the two countries have had several ups and downs. For instance, the US did not recognize the Soviet Union until 1933, while the European great powers have done so already in the 1920s. During the World War II, there was much fruitful cooperation, but in 1946, another period of animosity started. The two countries almost came to war during the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962. Then in the 1970s, the period of détente, the relaxation of tensions began, which lasted into the Reagan years as the Soviet system began to fall apart. The Soviet Union dissolved in 1991, but the relations with Russia became tense again during the NATO attack on the Federal Republic of Yugoslavia in 1999. After a period of lukewarm cooperation and the alleged reset, the relations deteriorated after the Western-supported coup d'etat in Ukraine and the Russian takeover of the Crimea. This is where we find ourselves today as the new Trump administration takes office. The article consulted Russian political experts and analysts on their opinion of what was going to happen next. Sergei Karaganov, a noted Russian international relations professor, stated that in his opinion, while there was no ideal America for Russia, since there was always going to be some conflict of interest, the relations between the two could get much better under Trump. According to Karaganov, Trump has taken a stand against the dominant US foreign policy consensus that the US is the global hegemon. This is why the Washington and Brussels establishments have been doing all they can to cripple him, even before he officially assumed the office of the president. Karaganov stated that these destructive, war-mongering geopolitical forces would ultimately not be successful. In his opinion, Russia and the United States should establish a strategic partnership, which would include the joint work on various threats to global stability, including terrorism, cybercrime, and proliferation of nuclear weapons. Karaganov also said that he believed that the misguided and destabilizing process of NATO expansion in Europe was over. He suggested that the US and Russia should establish new rules of the geopolitical game in Europe, which would include the guarantee of military neutrality for all states that have not become NATO members by this time. The article also contacted Victoria Zhuravlyova, who is a senior associate at the Russian Center for North American Studies. She said that Trump could soon be confronted with the waves of domestic protests and boycotts, and that therefore he was likely to seek to stabilize the US relations with other great powers in order to focus on domestic issues. Zhuravlyova did not believe that the anti-Russian sanctions would be lifted anytime soon, considering that the US Congress was dominated by the anti-Russian and anti-Putin politicians. However, at the same time, it was possible that Trump would use the foreign policy instruments which he has as the president to improve relations with Russia. In my opinion, this article presents a cautiously optimistic picture for the improvement in the US-Russian relations under Trump. Clearly, the analysts consulted hoped that Trump would make it possible for the United States and Russia to cooperate again, to make the world great again. But they are afraid that there are very powerful political and intelligence forces out there who will plot and scheme against Trump in order to bring his presidency down. No wonder then that both Karaganov and Zhuravlyova advised Trump to be careful and to cover his back. Dear friends, that's all for today. Be cool and stay cool until the next edition of the Russian newspaper Monitor.
For just a small subscription fee, you can become a member of the Newsbud community and help keep this website running. Your subscription will provide you with full community access to exclusive content, including videos and articles from Newsbud's team of experts and analysts, as well as a members-only monthly newsletter from Newsbud's founder, Sibel Edmonds. Sign up today for full access at newsbud.com.